I really do appreciate you coming out on Saturday. We're all a little bit selfish with our Saturdays anymore, aren't we? You know, kind of hard to give up a Saturday for anything, and we have the same problem up home as you do here, I'm sure. But it makes me appreciate you all the more to be here. I remember not too long ago, I'd gone to a seminar somewhere for a Saturday, and one of the elders got up and announced ahead of time. He said, "Well, you folks are here on Saturday." He said, "Now you know what it feels like to be a Seventh-day Adventist." Yeah, so, you know, take that for what it's worth. We really appreciate the hospitality gift that was brought over last night. That is so nice, and we've already been sampling that. And, you know, we saw the homemade, I think it's banana bread, and we saw all the cookies. But when we saw that you have beef jerky, we thought, these are our kind of people. Yeah. So thank you so much. That was very kind. We appreciate that hospitality gift, and we are enjoying it already, and we'll continue to enjoy it because there's a lot there. So again, thank you so much. It is good to have my wife, Judy, here today. Let me tell you a little bit about us. Don't want to bore you too long, but a little bit about us. We've been married 44 years, and you know, those years have passed quickly. We have 3 adult children. We have 2 boys and a girl. And we've known a lot about the joys of marriage and raising kids. And we've known something about the difficulties and challenges that come along too. We've known the heartache. We've seen a child go through divorce. And we realize that that hurts everyone. And so we've seen a lot. I do a lot of marital counseling. That doesn't mean I'm an expert. I do not have a license in counseling, but it comes with the territory. And I do a lot of that. I've seen a lot, and I am not an expert. Someone defined an expert sometimes of someone that speaks about something when they're at least 100 miles from home. So in that sense, maybe I'm an expert, but I've struggled just like everyone else. We're real people, and we live in this real world too. But I have learned some things along the way. And I pray that the things that we talk about here in the next couple of days will be profitable to everyone. And again, we are just thankful that we can be a part of this today. I want to begin in a general way. This is kind of how I handle things. I usually start out here and then I do like this. And so in this lesson, I'll start out here and I will do some talking, but I don't want you to think that I've got to do all the talking. If there's something you want to chime in and say, you're welcome to do that. Because cross-learning is important also, and we know that there are folks here that probably know more about some things than I do, and so we'd love to hear from you too. But how did we get to where we are? It's an interesting thing as you look at today's family. It's kind of like the rest of society, I think, that there's a struggle. There's a real struggle in marriage. There's a real struggle in just our lives in general, and we're pulled in every direction. And the family has really taken a beating over the last several years in particular. I grew up in what we call the time of a nuclear family. My dad worked outside the home. He worked for TVA. All his working years, he worked for TVA. And my mom stayed at home, not because she didn't have the ability to go out. My mom was a very smart lady. She's not highly educated as we think about in schooling, but she's a very intelligent lady. And I remember many times she's a very good seamstress and had such a good eye for materials and matching things. There'd be some stores that would just beg her to come and work for them, but she never did that. I had 3 older sisters, and then when I was 15 years old, we decided, or I don't think that was decided at all, but there was a newcomer that came along, and so I have a little brother that's 15 years younger than I am. So by that time, my oldest sister had already married, 25 years between the oldest and the youngest, and so he has nieces and nephews that are older than he is, and that's just kind of the way it went with us. But today's family looks a lot different generally. In fact, we learned that just about 20% of the families today are actually nuclear families. So the structure has changed a lot because that was very common when I was growing up. So let me read some lyrics here this morning of a very familiar old country song that you know. But I think it kind of sets a tone for where I want to go in the next few minutes here this morning. Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. Sometimes it seems like this world's gone crazy. Grandpa, take me back to yesterday when the line between right and wrong didn't seem so hazy. Did lovers really fall in love to stay? Stand beside each other come what may? Promise really something people kept, not just something they would say? Families really bow their heads to pray. Daddies really never go away. Oh, Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. Grandpa, everything is changing fast. We call it progress, but I just don't know. And Grandpa wandered back into the past and paint me the picture of long ago. Did lovers really fall in love to stay, stand beside each other come what may? A promise really something people kept, not just something they would say and forget. Families really bow their heads to pray, daddies really never go away. Oh, Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. Tell me about the good old days. Some of you, as I look around, I'm not going to accuse anyone, but maybe a couple of you in here kind of remember what we call the good old days. And my mother is still living. My mother's 93, and I'll tell you what she says about the good old days. They can have them. There were some things in years gone by that were good, but some things were not so good. And she said, as far as my lifestyle, I'll take this day anytime over the good old days, because she said they weren't so good. It just burns her up to see a young person in a pair of jeans that have holes in them. She said, I pick cotton in those kind of jeans, and she won't wear a pair of jeans to this day. Well, 93, I don't know how many pairs of jeans you have anyway. But anyway, she just feels like that. You and I have grown up with everything being new and improved. You can look in your cabinet, you look at your cleaning products, it doesn't matter what it is. Everything is new and improved. And we always have been taught, well, if it's new and improved, it's got to be better than the old, and so we need to get something new and improved. And that isn't always the truth, but sometimes it is. There are some things that have really been improved over the years. Now, I don't date back to the earliest, but I remember that when I was a kid, my mom had a Wringer washing machine. And she was thrilled with that because, as she used to say, when I grew up, I washed on that washboard, she called it. I had that washboard, and she said I skinned my knuckles and taking the hide off my knuckles many times using that old washboard. So when she got a Wringer washing machine, she thought that things had really moved on up for her, and they had compared to what they were. And I can remember watching her as a kid, and she put those clothes in that little Wringer, and she thought that's pretty neat. However, sometimes her fingers would go right on in with it, and she'd have to reverse it and get them back out a little flatter than the way they went in. But we don't have to do that in our house, man. We've got all kind of buttons, and we can press on that. We can do permanent press, and we can do, towel. We can do whatever. And then we can take them out of that washing machine, which is really hard because we don't have to do the other stuff anymore. But it's difficult because you have to take them out and put them in the dryer then. And so we put them in that dryer, don't have to put them out on the clothesline anymore. And we can press a button, we can do permanent press, and we can do, the time, it doesn't matter, we can do all that. So those kinds of things have really improved. I understand there's a unit on the market today that actually does the washing and the drying in the same unit. And the way I figured, if they ever get the one that will do that and press them, then they can name their price. We'll pay anything that they want for it. So some things have improved, but some things haven't. And I think especially when it comes to the family. You see, there again, when I grew up, I was kind of the tail end of Dr. Spock. And, the big debate was to spank or not to spank. And how that we need to loosen the reins of authority on our kids and let them make their own decisions and choices in life. And I heard that in my growing up years and some of the early years. But I'm pleasantly surprised in the last few years that actually, that message has changed to where now we are hearing those that we call the experts, those that are in family therapy and such like, to say, you'd probably be better off not to listen so much to what we've got to say. Because our ways aren't working nearly as well as what they did back in Grandma and Grandpa's days. So apparently they were on to something that we've changed that maybe we need to go back to, because there's some things that apparently they got right that we maybe have altered in a way that we shouldn't have. So that's why I want us to think, what are some of the things that have changed? Now, I'm not just trying to identify them only, but I want to identify some of those things and maybe get us thinking a little in a direction that maybe will help us to do better than what we've been doing in our family life. So let's talk about that. Let's begin with number one. I think a big one that has changed in our day and time is the amount of time that families spend together. Josh, let me just ask you, here, how many kids do you have?
3.
See, we're still learning. We don't know each other that well. Okay, you have 3. So how much time in any given day do you think you spend with your kids?
Depends on the day. On average, probably 3, sometimes more, 3 hours.
Okay, all right. So anybody else have a different answer? What would you say? I'm sorry, I don't know names yet. I'll ask back here on the back.
4 hours.
4 hours? That's pretty good. There's an interesting study that was done several years ago at Cornell University. And they asked the middle-aged families, not middle-aged, but middle-class families, what do you feel like, or how much time do you think that you spend with your families, especially the fathers? They asked about how much time, because they figured that fathers are going to spend less than the mothers just by the way things are. So they asked them, how much time do you really think in a given day? And they said the same thing. We live in a busy time, and they're thinking 2, 3 hours, maybe 4 a day. So what they did then is they wired them. Now, this is not just being on the same property, and not just necessarily being in the same vehicle or in the same ball field or that kind of thing, but it's actually talking about interaction with that child and actually engaging them in some way, whether it's playing a game or teaching them, whatever the case might be. They wired them and they studied them for 2 weeks. And when the 2 weeks were up, these guys that have said they spend probably 2 or 3 hours a day with their kids, the result was this. They said the average middle-class father spends 37.7 seconds with his kid on an average day. So it makes us think a little bit. I'm not sure that that's accurate with everyone. I think that probably if you'll look up, you can Google anything, sometimes good, sometimes bad. But if you were to ask now, how much time do families actually spend together? They're, again, interacting, not just on the same property. They say about 37 minutes a day. That's the average family, not just dads, that's the average family, about 37 minutes a day. In days gone by, there were opportunities to spend time together far more than there are now, as you know. And the reason for that was because we had farming families in days gone by more than other families. And Dad would get up early, and the kids would get up early, and Mom would get up early, and usually they would have that breakfast, and then they're headed out to the fields. And the kids would spend a lot of time with Dad, especially the boys, and learning how to do certain things, and the girls were often there. And then it gets close, it used to be, it wasn't lunch, it was dinner back then. So when you got close to dinner time, then Mom often would come back in, and the girls would come back in, and they would spend time with Mom to prepare the meal, and they'd go out and ring the dinner bell. There you go, there's that dinner bell. I remember seeing one. We never had it at our house. But they'll ring that, and then everybody comes in for lunch, and you eat together, and then you're back out in the fields, probably until dark. But the thing about it is that kids spend a lot of time with their parents. Boys spend a lot of time with their dads, and girls spend a lot of time with Mom, and the other as well. But we don't have that kind of family anymore. And we learned that as a result of that it's often taken its toll on a lot of things when it comes to family life. A lot of things that we learn, even values, we learn by osmosis, or it's been said that values are more easily caught than they are taught. Now, we know that there has to be taught values, but yet we learn by watching and interchanging and those things that we just see and we follow every day. And I'll talk about that a little more as we get toward the end of this lesson. But a lot of families don't have that kind of time for interaction anymore. There are 2 particular areas that I see that are of great value that have kind of gone out the window with a lot of families. Not every family, but a lot of families. The first one is what family therapists now call table time. My dad, as I said, worked for TVA. He was not a farmer. He did a little bit early on, but really wasn't a farmer. But he always worked a swing shift. You know one thing about TVA, you know you're going to work a swing shift. So you work first, second, third, and you interchange, and there are some jobs that are like that still, but that's what he always did all my growing up years. And I remember the graveyard shift. Everybody knows what a graveyard is, right? That's that third shift when you work all night long. Now, I never figured out if it was a graveyard meant it was killing him or he was going to kill the rest of us because he couldn't sleep the way we were making too much noise. So anyway, I'm not sure where that graveyard came from, but it could be both. I don't know. But my dad always worked that. But when he was off or when he was on a day shift, I remember watching him. We'd look for him as kids driving the driveway about 4:30 every afternoon. And we knew that it was a good time. Not because he just came home, but my mom was the old country cook, and so she would come in, and she already had a big spread on the table, and we'd all sit down as a family, and we would eat together as a family. And when we were at home and everybody was there, that's what we did. We ate together as a family. I do a lot of premarital counseling. I just finished up a session with a young couple the other night, and I asked one question that as a part of that, and that is, what is something that you had in your family that you would like to carry on as a tradition in your own family. One of the things this young lady said, I want us to eat our family meals together. A lot of families don't have table time anymore. We just don't eat together. Maybe because we're eating in shifts, because, we're running, and, well, I got to take him, got to take her, we got to do this, got to do that, and so we're kind of eating in shifts in that way. Or we're involved in sports, maybe with our kids, so we're eating at the ball field, we're doing something, and sometimes, and we're sometimes guilty of that too, so I'm not going to say that we've never done this, but sometimes when we have the time that we can sit down and eat together, what do? We get it and we do what? Watch TV, that's right. We gather around the TV, and so we sit there, but we don't have that interchange and we don't have that discussion. You say, we used to solve the world's problems every day when we could sit around the table together, and usually the conversation went far beyond the meal. Nobody was in a hurry to get up and take off somewhere because we were so involved in what had gone on. Excuse me. Pollen is in the air. But we would just talk about life. And it really meant a lot, and that's what's normal to me. But that has gone out the window with a lot of families in this day and time, that we don't have table time anymore. The next one that I would talk about, and I think it really shows up a lot because of the lack of time, and that is with our young people. There again, I'm not indicting all parents because it isn't true with everyone, but I think we're growing up with a lot of kids that don't know about discipline. A lot of kids that don't know about discipline. Now, discipline, I'm not talking about spanking only. I'm not against spanking, but I'm not talking about spanking only, but I'm just talking about disciplining our children the way that they should be. If you don't believe me, go and talk to the teachers at school and ask them that have been there for a little while how things have changed with kids over the years. And there's a big reason for that, and there again, probably because families have broken up so much and because the time is not spent with them. But I tell you what happens a lot of times with us, and it really happened to me back when I was doing graduate work several years ago. Our kids have always adjusted pretty well in school and have done well, but our oldest son, in fourth grade, I believe it was at that time, I'd gone back to get my master's degree, and I'm always one, if I'm in there, I'm in all the way, and so I'm pulling all-nighters again, and I'm doing that kind of stuff, trying to finish it up. Well, one day Judy gets a call from the teacher at school and says, what's going on with Phil? What's going on at home? And Judy's kind of rocked back on her heels and thinking, oh, I don't know. What do you mean? She said, well, he's always been seemingly one of the nicest, one of the best behaved, one of the most grounded kids that we have, but it hasn't really been true lately. And she said, I've learned in my years of teaching that when things are usually not going well with a child like this, that something's not going well at home. And Judy and I got our heads together after she told me that, after I got home. And she said, here's what happened today. And I knew what was going on. You see, I tried to be very involved with our kids, with whatever they did. But I was missing some of that because I was so tied up with studying and going to class and all that kind of stuff that I had let a lot of that go by the wayside. And so we decided right then that we're going to change some things. I finished my degree, but I changed the way that I did things. And it wasn't very long until that straightened up and it got right back to where it was initially. But I was the problem because I wasn't spending the time with him that I was, and he missed that. I wish that I could take you in counseling sessions with me, which wouldn't benefit you in everything, but just to hear kids talk sometimes about their parents. I remember one time, and it hasn't been that long ago, a 13-year-old boy came in. They were really having some struggles with him. And as I talked with him, I had known him, and he was willing to talk to me. And his dad was working out of town on a regular basis. I mean, he would come in like on the weekend, sometimes every other weekend, but he was gone way too much. And it was reflected in that boy. He missed his dad. 13 years old. He needed his dad. His dad said, I had this good job and a high-paying job, and won't have to do this but a few years, and we can retire, and everything will be all right. Well, I talked to him about that, and I said, well, let me tell you something. You know, you're going to have to kind of weigh this out and kind of check your priorities. Because here's the problem. Your son freely admits it. I miss my dad. And it seems like I'm not a part of his life anymore. You know what the dad did? Nothing. He just kept right on doing what he was doing. You know what happened to the kid? you probably don't want to because it didn't turn out well. So there again, family time is so important. But it's that we have to make time. It doesn't just come around freely for all of us. Family time is really important to all families. And it doesn't matter so much who you are. It's important to husband and wife too. And so we just have to make time. Paul says that we are to redeem the time because the days are evil. So time with family is one of those things that's really changed a lot, but not necessarily for the better. Now, this is going to come at you a little bit sideways, so I want you to listen all the way through with what I'm going to say about this. But I think a big change that we have seen over the past several years is, especially from my growing up years, is seeing both husband and wife work outside the home. There's a trade-off to everything that we do in life. Okay, you got that? There's a trade-off to every decision we make in life. If we make this, then we're going to trade it for something else, and that's just the way life works. And let me say this up front. It's not a sin, and please understand this part. I'm not saying that it is. Not a sin for the wife to work outside the home, okay? So I want you to hear that right up front. We see there's Priscilla. We learn about Aquila and how she worked with her husband. So we find examples even in the Bible that a wife working outside the home per se. However, I think there again, when those kids are small, I would really encourage young mothers, if they can, to stay with them. I really do. Now, you might say, you sound like a dinosaur saying that. Maybe so. If that's so, I accept it. I embrace it. I'm a dinosaur. But I say that not because that's just the way I grew up with my mom and dad. I say that because of what I see and what I have experienced. For example, as ministers, it's not an uncommon stop for us to go to the hospital and visit folks. And I was just there a day or two ago before we left. And anyway, there was a time not so long ago that there was a nurse there that knew me, and I knew who she was, but I didn't really know her. And I didn't remember the church where I preach. But she said, "Brother Stan, do you have a minute?" I said, "Well, sure." So we go off in a room by ourselves, and I could tell she had a heavy heart. She said, "Brother Stan, I have messed up." I said, "Well, tell me what's on your mind." She said, "Well, when our kids were small, I had this real burning desire to be a nurse," which she then was. Nothing wrong with being a nurse, very honorable profession. I appreciate nurses, so nothing about that. She said, "However, I didn't feel like it could wait. I felt like I needed to go into school right then, and I did." And she said, "I freely admitted, I know I neglected my husband. I know I neglected our kids when I did that, but I just felt like it's something I had to do then, or it couldn't wait. I had to finish it right then, so I did." So I did all of that, and then I became a nurse, and she said I worked the nurse's hours, as most of us would know what they are, and it's not always conducive to a family life, especially when there are small kids that are there. And she said, "But now I'm paying the price." She said, "Both my kids are now mid-teens, and we're having some major problems with them." She said, "My husband and I are also having problems." But she said, not that anyone in the family is perfect, but she said, I put a lot of that on me because I didn't devote the kind of time that I should have to my husband and to my kids. Sometimes the things that are said in the simplest ways are maybe the most impactful. There have been many times that I have heard, and certainly marriage therapists have heard, a woman say, "I wish that I had spent more time with my kids while they were small." But I've never heard, and I don't think any other therapist has ever heard, "I wish that I had spent more time working when our kids were small, but I just spent way too much time with them." And that may sound as simple as falling off a log. And there again, I don't say that to make any mothers or wives in here feel guilty. But I'm suggesting that maybe this is something we ought to consider, because we live in a day to where it's almost assumed that if a young couple gets married, that the wife is going to work outside the home, regardless of whether there are kids there or not, and that's not always good. I think I would ask this question. If you have small kids at home, especially preschool, why would you want to work outside the home? You might say, "Well, what kind of world do you live in? Do you not realize the price of groceries these days?" Or any number of things that are so expensive. How do couples make it if you don't have dual incomes? Because our society has kind of been set up on that. I read just the other day, you know how much the average wife makes working outside the home if you factor in child care? Now, I know that Grandma and Grandpa and some other folks sometimes come into play with that, and Judy and I do a little bit of that, not all the time, but we do some of that. And when you factor that in, do you know for 2 children, if you put them in preschool, or if you put them in child care, I should say, child care, do you know what the average cost a year is? The average cost for 2 kids in child care is $31,000 a year. If then you factor in transportation and clothing and such like that you're going to have to get to wherever that workplace probably is going to be, unless you work at home, you can factor in another $10,000 or $11,000. If the average woman working outside the home is making, say, $50,000 a year, and it's going to cost over $40,000 just to put her there, I think that we have to ask the question, is it really worth it? I don't know the exact number, but it wasn't so long ago. A few years ago, it said the average wife that worked outside the home, the average, made $1.25 an hour when you factored in all those other things. So the question becomes, is it really worth it? But I think there's a bigger thing, not the money value of it, but I think there's a bigger thing. Number one, if it causes us to lose our children, is it worth the price? Number two, if it causes us to lose our own salvation because we're so overwhelmed that we let our spiritual lives go, then I think again we have to ask the question, is it really worth it? So once again, good, bad, or indifferent, I think this is something that we have to weigh. How is this going to work in our family? Now, unless you think that I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, Judy worked some, my wife, worked some outside the home when our kids were growing up. But she had a job that was very compatible because she was a preschool teacher. And so when the kids were in school, she was in school. When they were out, she was out. She was out during the summer. So it worked out in our family situation to where they didn't have to stay at home by themselves, or we have to get a babysitter to come in when she's working, that kind of thing. Now, Judy, if you knew her, she's probably could do about whatever she wants to do. I say that very kindly, and I say that very sincerely. But she chose rather to do that so that we could put our kids, we had an objective for that, not just to make money, but so that we could put our kids in a Christian school, and that's what we did, and that's where they all graduated. That was our choice. We didn't have to do that, but we did that, but we wanted to do it in such a way that they were not neglected during those times either. But I believe this is a big one that has caused a real change in the structure of the family, and maybe some real challenges in the family that both husband and wife work outside the home. Now let me pause here for just a minute. Any comment that you guys would like to make? You're welcome to. Apparently I've said it all. Let's move on. Now this one too becomes a little tough in our day and time because most folks have been hurt by divorce. I don't mean that you necessarily been through one yourself, but as I said, we've known that from child point of view or having as a parent point of view with a child going through divorce. And of course, we've all had friends, and I would imagine if it's like it is at Killen, that's the congregation where I preach, there are probably some folks here that have gone through divorce too. That would be rather unusual if there had not been. Now, I'm not saying that you're guilty and that you're, I'm just saying that it happens. It's so common in our society. But how that has affected us in our day and time is that divorce has become rather easy. You can be divorced in 30 days anymore. Uncontested, you can just pretty well breeze through that. And so it's easy for one thing, but then it also has become far more accepted in society. God hates divorce. That's what the Bible says. Malachi 2. Well, no, God hates divorce. But I would take it beyond that. And of course, that's the most important thing. But I have found out that folks that have gone through divorce, they hate it too. And I guarantee you, as a parent, if your kids have gone through divorce, you're not going to like it either. It's going to affect everyone. I didn't know that until maybe we had gone through it, and maybe God allows some of these things. I don't mean that God made our kid have a divorce. I don't mean that at all. But I think that God sometimes strengthens us by the things that we go through if we handle it the right way. And I learned some things. I learned how to be far more compassionate, not only to people that go through divorce, but also the family. We have a couple there. In fact, he's still a deacon. They're both now in their mid-80s. Some of the finest people, just kind of the salt of the earth of the congregation. You think, wow, these are some of the finest people, and they are. They are always been. They're solid folks. You'd never have to worry about them, you wouldn't think. But then they had a son to go through divorce a few years ago, and it just about got the best of them, as it happens with a lot of families. Well, that had gone on for a good little while, and I had seen them, but not really to talk to them about this situation. And knowing how much that Judy and I had hurt because we had had to go through that same situation ourselves, I told Judy, I said, I'm going to go to see the Moores. And she said, okay. And I said, I haven't really had a chance to talk with them. So I did, and they seemed to be happy to see me, and I think they were. But I think there was more than that than just me coming to visit them. And here's what they said. They said, Stan, we thought the church had forgotten about us. Now, these are folks that you would think would never even let that thought cross through their minds, but they have been so hurt by what they had experienced with their own family situation. And they're still very faithful and such like, but I just say that to make us think a little bit about how difficult it was for them. But divorce is, for the most part in our day and time, a little more than a high school breakup. But when I was a kid growing up, I'm 66. When I was a kid growing up, divorce was something that you kind of whispered. You remember that? You kind of whispered. You didn't talk about it out loud much. But that tells you how attitudes about divorce have changed over time. So divorce has become easy. It has become far more accepted. And it's become just an easy out for a lot of folks. And it shouldn't be. Never should be. We might ask, and next session we'll talk about this a little more in depth. And like I say, we start out here and we come in with this. But we might ask, what is it that happens that folks say I do to I don't anymore? What happens in between? What changes that so much? And we'll talk about some of the specifics of that, but this is kind of a broad stroke at that to say it's so easy in our day and time and so accepted. There's also the idea that we might think about, and we mentioned this just in passing a moment ago, but there's a real lack of values that are often present in any home anymore. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, you'll remember that God said, of the things that I've taught you, number one, I want them to be in your heart. Then he said, I want you to teach them to your children diligently. And I want you to do that when you're sitting in your house, when you're walking by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. I want you to bind them as a sign on your hands, as frontlets between your eyes. I want you to write them on your doorposts and out on the gates. Going back and tying some of the other things we've already said, it takes a lot of time, doesn't it? To teach them when we're sitting in the house and when we're walking by the way and when we lie down, when we rise up. That's about every situation in life that, number one, that you and I have a responsibility to teach our kids godly ways. I've always tried to look at the church Bible classes, love them. But I've tried to look at those as helpers, but not as primary. Because primary should be you and me. I believe that values are taught and caught at home more than anywhere else. Let me tell you what happened not too long ago, just to bring out one illustration of this, something that I think every church struggles with, especially elderships anymore. And our eldership is the same way, and it's coming that season again. They're talking about it in an elders meeting just the other night. What can we do to help our people, our young people in particular, with modesty? What can we do to help them with modesty? And they're not wanting them to dress like Amish or Mennonites. They're wanting them to dress modestly. That's the key, and you know that. And one Sunday morning, I remember coming in, and we had a full auditorium, probably 500 folks there that day or so. And as I walk in the middle doors, and we have doors on the outside, and I'm going down the center aisle, there was a mother that was sitting about the second or third pew down on the right, and with her daughter. And I remember that it just caught my attention that when I walked in, the daughter was trying her best to pull her dress down far enough that she'd have something to sit on. I mean, it was really that short. And I thought, that's not good. But then as I walked on a little farther and saw where her mom was sitting, her dress wasn't any longer than her daughter's. And I thought, there's the problem. There's the problem. Judy and I were involved with the Christian camp many years. We did Maywood, and then when we were the Carolina Bible Camp. We did that for a lot of years. In fact, Judy continued on after I retired from that. But anyway, we always enjoyed that, and our kids always benefited from summer camp greatly. But I remember one year when Judy was a counselor with some young teenage girls, that at camp, like a lot of places, they actually have a dress code. And you can have shorts, but they can't be short shorts. They have to be a certain length, and good reason for that. You're trying to teach the kids modesty. But it was a Saturday morning, and the kids were getting ready and packing up to go home. And this one girl put on some very short shorts. And Judy said, honey, you can't wear those here. She said, oh, don't worry about these. I'm just going to wear these home. Isn't that, again, the problem? That it's okay at home. I'll respect it as long as it's here, and I'll wear that here. And I know that it goes both ways in a sense, but I think that we just have to use common sense and realize that God wired us differently. And that's why a lot of times when we talk about, I don't think that men should be allowed to do any and everything that they want to do. But I think that that God made us the way He made us, that men are far more sexually stimulated by what they see. Then there's a reason that God told women that I want you to dress in modest apparel. But the point that I'm making here, and I'm not saying that anybody here doesn't. I don't know you well enough, and I assume that if you can be here on a Saturday morning that you're good folks and you believe in modesty too. But the point is that are we teaching our young people the kind of modesty that they need to know? But there again, it has to be modeled as well as verbalized. And that's so important for us to know. It's been said that we're raising a lot of kids today with straight teeth but crooked values. And probably some pretty good truth in that. So the lack of values taught at home anymore has caused a big change in what we see in family life. And then let me move on to what I want to refer to as the last one here this morning, and that is, and it's closely related to that, but I think it's important that we think about this one too, and that is the absence of spiritual priorities. The absence of spiritual priorities. Matthew 6:33, probably most folks, if not all, could quote that. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all the things of life that we worry about and struggle with, those things will be added to us if we keep our priorities right. What about our spiritual priorities? I was blessed. I didn't know it at the time, but I was blessed to have a mom and a dad that were both Christians. They did stay together, and I'm happy for that. That doesn't mean they didn't have their struggles, but I'm saying that they worked through those things, and church life is all I've ever known. Now, when I was a kid, I don't know that I appreciated that nearly as much as I do now, but it was just a part of what we were. So there was the absence of spiritual values that some kids had that I didn't, and I'm so thankful for that. We always went to every service of the church. I mean, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday, that was a given. But we also, if we had a gospel meeting, we went every time. And there again, I'm a kid. And that doesn't mean that I always thought that was the greatest thing in the world. Now, it's not that I had trouble going to church, but there were some times because I was a kid that I struggled with that because I loved baseball. As a kid, that was my sport. I loved it. I'm not saying I was good at it. I'm just saying I had a love for it. So I loved baseball. And it seemed like every time we had a gospel meeting is about the time that we had all-stars come around and they're playing several nights of the week. But I could forget it. Not that I was an all-starter anyway, but anyway, I could forget it because if church night was there, then we didn't go because church came first. And I remember thinking, I'm not so happy about that, but that was the kid in me. I don't know why. It's the devil, no doubt. You guys remember The Wonderful World of Disney? You remember when it came on? 6:30 on Sunday night. Church started at 6, so I never got to see The Wonderful World of Disney. And I'd go to school the next day, and they would be talking about what they saw the night before, the monkey's uncle, and all those things that they always wanted to see, but I couldn't see it because I had to go to church. Well, there again, the kid nature of me. Now I wouldn't take anything for that. I'm so glad that even the times when maybe I didn't want to go, that mom and dad made me go, Really? You mean they made you? Yeah, they did. That's who we were. And you see, so it wasn't just something that we did, but it's who we were. And that made a huge difference in my life. Had I not had parents like that, no telling where I'd be today. But they taught me spiritual priorities. Isn't it a shame that we have so many kids that are growing up in families today that not only are growing up in broken families, they don't know who their dad is. They often aren't even spending time with mom or dad. It says a full third of all white children will grow up in a family with only one parent. When you go to black families, that's 2/3. 2/3 of all black kids grow up in a family where many times they don't know who dad is, and it may be mom, it may be their grandmother, it may be an aunt, it may be somebody, but they grow up on a shoestring. And I'm not saying that to say black kids are worse than white kids. I'm saying they have it worse because they don't have those influences in their life that they should. Spiritual priorities. So very, very important. So I'm going to just ask you dads, you don't have to answer out loud, and you mothers and us grandparents, what are we doing in showing the values that we should before our kids, modeling those values, and also teaching them spiritual priorities? Because you see, if we don't, who else is going to do it? It's our responsibility to do that. I was a senior in college up at Freed-Hardeman, and it was February the 17th, 1978. And we didn't have cell phones at that time, but we did have a phone in our rooms. It's one of those little deals that sat on a little phone stand right between the beds that we were there. My phone rang at 3:30 on a Friday morning. When your phone rings at 3:30 on a Friday morning, there are usually about 3 thoughts that come to mind. Number 1, it's a prank call. Number 2, it's a wrong number. Or number 3, it's bad news. I wish it had been the first 2, but it was the third. And when I answered the phone, there was a neighbor whose name was Leon Alexander. He's gone on now. But he was a good family member, and his son and I claimed each other as brothers. But he said, Stan, those words will never leave me, I don't think. He said, Stan, I hate to call you the worst in the world. But he said, let me tell you, your dad just passed away. That was unexpected. My dad was 57. He didn't have any illnesses that we knew of, but he died of a massive heart attack. Died there at home on the way to the hospital. And you talk about something that will send an arrow or sword straight through you, that's one that will. And you know, you sit up on the side of the bed and you think, is this a nightmare? Is this a dream? Is this really true? And of course, it was really true. Well, my roommate, who was from West Virginia, or from Virginia, he helped me kind of get my things together, very supportive and understanding. And anyway, I loaded up the old Pontiac and I headed back home. It's a 2-hour drive from where we lived to Freed-Hardeman. And so as I came back across the Tennessee River there in Savannah, Tennessee, the sun was beginning to come up a little bit. My dad loved to fish more than about anybody that I've ever seen in the world. He loved to crappie fish. Maybe it's crappie here, I don't know, but he loved to crappie fish. And so anyway, he had me up many times to go with him. And it was about that time of year that I remember that you go out and you smell the honeysuckles and such like. And those memories just started flooding back. And I thought about that and how important those things were to me at the time and how precious they were, but especially it was more than that. It was spending time with my dad. Well, as I got close to home, there's a little hill before you get to where my mom lived there on the right, my dad. And it's one of those things that you know it's true, but you really don't want to believe it, and that's kind of the way it was for me at that time. And as I drove over that little rise there, I was hoping that I would see nothing, that it was just something that just a bad dream, but it wasn't. As I drove in, it's early morning, and there are cars everywhere, and I thought, oh no, it's true. Well, made it through that, but the reason I bring that up here is to say my dad was always a blue-collar worker. I told you he worked for TVA. He never had a big paying job. My dad finished the 6th grade. That's as far as he went in school. So he was always very insecure about anything that had anything to do with paperwork. And as seniority went along, he was offered supervisor jobs and such like, but he would never take them because he was so afraid there'd be something he wouldn't know how to do and it'd be embarrassing to him. So he never took those. So as a result of that, we just had a meager, but we never really suffered. We always had clothes to wear. We always had plenty of food to eat. Never had the finest of things, but we didn't have to. You don't miss what you never had. So we made it fine. But that was never important to me, and I never thought about those kinds of things when my dad died. What I remembered was him. And if you've been through that experience, you know that. If you haven't, let me just tell you how it will be. What you'll remember is who they were. And you remember their character, not about the material things. But to take that a little farther, that's what they're going to remember about you and me too. So if we have set before them those spiritual priorities, how important that is. And I'm glad that I had parents that did that. If I had come in on a Sunday afternoon and asked my mom and dad, "Are we going to church tonight?" They'd say, "Son, you've been out in the sun too long. You know that we're going to go to church tonight." Or if I came in on a Wednesday night and I said, "I've got so much homework, I don't think I can go." They'd say, "Son, you may have a lot of homework and you can stay up later, but you're going to go to church." And that's just the way it was. But it wasn't just going to church, so don't let me get the legalistic part all out of sorts here. It was also that you respect mom and dad when you're home. You didn't talk back. In fact, I got knocked in the middle of next week for talking back. My parents didn't know about timeout. All they knew was knockout. And I don't say that they ever abused me because they didn't, but they enforced what they knew was right and good. And I think that we tried to carry that on in our families. I've probably fallen far short with that, but I tried to do my best. But I'm saying it's so important. So these are some of the things I believe that have gotten us to where we are now. Time, not spending the time that we should with our families. Both parents working outside the home creates challenges. Everything's a trade-off in life. The ease, the general acceptance of divorce, the lack of values that are taught at home, spiritual priorities that are not there anymore or not there in many homes. There again, I'm not trying to indict everyone, but that's where I would begin today. I just kind of wanted to lay it out and make us think about how we got to where we are. And I hope that maybe in the remainder of our time, we can think about where do we go from here and that we make things the way that they should be. So let me pause for just a minute before I sit down, just to see if there's any comment that you might like to make about anything, or maybe something else has come up in your mind you feel would fit well here. I'd be glad to have you to say that at this time if you do. All right, be quiet if you want to. I'm going to talk some more here in a little while. Thank you for your kind attention. We'll take up here with the next session.